It's the fifth movement of a fantasy, which I've entitled Pianist Saves the World, in a very tongue-in-cheek thought and title. Ultimately, I decided to call it that, even though it sounds a little bit weird. But I thought it is a fantasy that by writing a piece of music, we might be able to change the world. And I recall in particular Dmitri Shostakovich, whose music is familiar to many of us. Often when we go to an MSO concert, we will hear them program at least once or twice in a year a Shostakovich symphony. And his music really did influence politics and thinking in the Soviet Union when he wrote it, to the extent that he was almost exiled to Siberia for the Fifth Symphony, which was reviewed by the National League of Composers in the social realist regime just towards the end of Stalin's brutal rule. And this Fifth Symphony was argued that maybe this piece has, anti-nation, against the nation tendencies, and the other half of the National Composers League interpreted it in their minds completely differently as a very pro-Soviet, exciting piece which emphasised the victory of the people. So it's not that big a fantasy. Maybe it's more a fantasy now that a pianist can change the world. But anyway, this was the piece that I wrote, and I'd like to share with you the fifth movement. And the melody started off as what I would regard as a fairly failed attempt to write a nice melody emphasising peace and tranquility in the world, which is what I see as the conclusion of my piece. And I'll play you my failed version of it. So a soppy ballad at best. Not that there's anything wrong with a soppy ballad, but it wasn't to my taste. And so I thought to myself, how am I going to make this more interesting and create a truly nice finish to my 45 minutes of fantasy? So I thought, well, first thing, I'm going to change the harmony underneath to this. So I changed the harmony to that. And then I thought, well, that's not going to constitute a piece on its own. And I thought about interesting ways of developing it. So I'll play you the piece in its entirety now, which repeats the melody 5 times, but in 5 very different ways. And I try to evoke with this amazing instrument that I have at my disposal some more interesting things. And there is... And very interestingly, the response that I got to the original improvisation was, "Oh, what's that you're playing, Stefan? Is that Robbie Williams or something?" But the response that I got to the final piece, and this was my experiment, I'd never written anything quite so outrightly emotional, and I guess as a worst interpretation, soppy, but heartfelt, heart on the sleeve. I'd never written anything quite like that. And the response I got was, you know, people coming up to me after the concert, after the premiere, with, you know, having shed a couple of tears and saying, I really like that. So I think this just shows how, you know, a failed idea to begin with, and it was really interesting for those of you who were here. The gentleman in the second, no, it was the first session. It was the first gentleman who spoke, who was talking about how when we innovate, 99% of our innovative ideas are going to be useless. Well, it was my feeling that what Dr. De Bono was saying was that we might actually keep some of those ideas, and who knows what they may turn into. These failed ideas, these failures, can often be, if we keep them in a sketch pad, in a notebook, they can often be the root of something much more interesting. So, I hope that's shed some light, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you.